to do like a Harry Potter or something like that. I just don't.
Well, I mean, dude, we all want a Harry Potter, right? Like, wouldn't that be nice?
I mean, I want it, but I just don't. I know that that's not. God didn't give me that.
I mean, I would love to talk with her. Because I don't think that she knew she had a Harry Potter on her hands. Like I know I'm sure she knew she had something that she had to say. She had a story to tell. And
Well, what is that? Like, how did she? I don't know anything about her, but like, did she struggle to even find a publisher for that?
I think she did. And I think it's so funny. Like, like, hold on, just 2 seconds, just so we can be official. Here, hold on 1 second.
Wow.
I mean, gotta be official somehow. But it's fun. Hey, by the way, I'm talking with no offense, Sciver or Sciver?
Nope. And Sciver, yeah.
Sciver, yeah, cool. And writer, artist, author. Super excited to have Noah with me today. Dude, really excited. I remember I kept walking by your table, at Heroes, and I'm like, this dude's got it going on. Like you had a good crowd all the time, and you had just your presentation was just solid all the way through. And they clearly love you because they give you great placement. So that's nothing to bark at.
I had a blast, man. I hadn't even done a show in years because before the pandemic, but I think even before that, I just hadn't really had my own table anywhere. So I'm in South Carolina, and I've been to Heroes Con before years ago. And I knew that was like a really solid show, so I'm like, I'm going to do this. And yeah, I was really lucky. They gave me a really nice table, and it's like I had a lot of people that just apparently a lot of people wanted to come and talk to me.
Oh, it's cool because like I think that one thing that's amazing about that show is that the people running it are as into the creators and the product as the people attending the show. So it's kind of this sort of like balanced machine. I almost feel I feel sorry for Chris Bichello or John Romita Jr. because they're sort of cordoned off in this sort of other side.
I didn't even know they were there.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because their times are sort of controlled because the crowd gets nuts.
I just feel like that stuff that sucks. Like if I ever got to that level, I wouldn't even want to do it like that, where you just have like, I'm only signing from this time to this time. Like I like just being around and talking to people.
Yeah, it's it's strange, and it's strange, and I've fortunately never had that problem in my life, but
it's coming.
It's coming, right? Sure. But it's an interesting thing. And I ended up like having to like, I've never, I mean, this is not a brag thing, but I've never waited in line to talk to people because I'm like, I wouldn't want anyone waiting in line to talk to me. Like it's, if I see someone, I'll be happy to chat with them. But I needed to talk to Jonathan Hickman about coming on the show. And I'm like, he had like, the Tensa barrier line set up, and I'm like, well, there were just 3 people. I'm like, that's okay. Like, I'm not going to stand there for 45 minutes. I'll stand there for 5, and it was fine. He was, it was the end of his signing period and he was totally cool. But
it was at Heroes Con?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
There's a whole group of people who are over there, who live in a rarefied era, in that sense in the industry. And it's not them. It's just like, if you slapped them in the middle of the show, it would just be a log jam.
Yeah.
And
that's true. Yeah. In fact, one year I did Heroes Con. I was there with my friend and we were sharing a table, and they had right next to us, Kevin Eastman, who's like one of the creators of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And he just said we had a lot. His line was in front of our table like the entire time.
Yeah,
it was terrible.
Yeah, and I'm sure, absolutely sure, every creator who has that sort of draw probably feels pretty bad about the sort of the impact it puts on their fellow creators, because everyone's been in the table that doesn't have a line. You know, like nobody walks in with a line. Um, yeah, it's. I mean, I remember back in the early '90s when the image guys, you know, were just when they. It was funny because they were huge for Marvel, but when they broke off and did their own thing to create image, it was a completely different level. And the shows, it became Beatlesque. It was just nuts. And you know, the lines were ridiculous, the management of people was crazy. And I feel sorry for all those show promoters, how they had to handle that, because it just was insane.
Yeah, that was really cool though. I have like such a nostalgia for that early image
Hmm.
era. In fact, I even have right here next to my drawing desk. I actually have the Spawn #1. Like
Oh wow.
it's
Yeah.
like the first like 6 issues.
Yeah.
Because I'm doing a little like autobiographical comic about that issue of Spawn that came out where he kills the child molester, the ice cream man,
Right. Yep.
which was like a big thing. Like I remember my neighborhood, like all the kids I knew were like, "Oh!" Like they couldn't believe it. It was so like scary and brutal and stuff.
Yeah.
Right about that.
So yeah, so your book, I was it's interesting because you know I so Joseph Smith and the Mormons, you know, I'm walking by and like what I get these big smiles inside when I see all the different comic books that are coming, like that are out, you know, and graphic novels, because it's no longer just, you know, Spawn or, you know, or the X-Men. It's like now, like the market is like, hey, we want stories, we want challenging and interesting material. And I was like, you know, when I first spotted him, like, oh my God, that's so great. Like, you know, and I think there was the guy who, that the Muhammad Ali book that
Uh,
was on the other, I think on the other side of the aisle from your location, not directly across, but like, it's just, it's like this great period. And then you were cool enough to send it along to me. And like, I spent the weekend, like in the world, like reading the book, like, you know, day and morning and evenings. Like I was just kind of like traveling through this not a very long period of time, of this man's life. And it was a really great thing. And I'm going to tell you, it's the funniest thing. And like, and maybe you're, you know, you're going to like have a great laugh at this, but I felt like I was like looking at this extended cut of a Schoolhouse Rock. Does that
that's the first time I've heard that one. That's good.
because like some of the artwork just had that kind of vibe to it, like the character quality of the faces. And I'm like, this is like got that whole kind of vibe going on. It was really good. It was just so it felt like I was like kind of like the young, you know, kid in me was getting this sort of like, okay, I'm gonna learn something here kind of thing, and be entertained in the process.
Yeah, cool. Sounds good to me.
What was the so I mean, like, you know, I mean, because here you are with, you know, with Spawn, and you know, and saying how image is sort of an impact with, you know, on your life as a kid or as a young person. Like what was the like the transition? Like when did you say like, hey, I'm like, this is what I want to do, or so, like I want to do these things? Like was it a childhood thing, or did you come across it like in later time and go, you know what?
Yeah, it was when I was like 20 years old. You know, like, so comic books were really big in my neighborhood and my family and everything, and superheroes and stuff. But I never had any ambitions to be like to work in that genre. Even as a kid, I never really wanted to be that kind of a cartoonist. I always wanted to be a cartoonist, but you know, I read other stuff like you know, I was really into like Ren and Stimpy at the time.
Yeah.
As far as like comics, like Bone was coming
Yep.
out back then. I was really into that. I was just into that kind of more cartoony stuff. Ralph Snart, he's weird.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was my ambition. Like if I was like going to draw at all, I was going to draw that kind of stuff. But I also wanted to be a paleontologist, you know, and all that. But then, so because I'm of that Jurassic Park generation, like,
Sure.
so that had a big impact on us. But yeah, when I tried to be like a painter for a while, and it just wasn't working out. And I saw this documentary called Crumb,
Mm-hmm.
and right after that, I saw American Splendor, the movie
Yep.
about Harvey Picar.
Yeah.
It was just like it was this big revelation to me that comics, you could do comics, but you didn't have to do them about superheroes or
Right.
something like that. Like they could be anything. They could be really personal. You can explore topics that are really, really interesting to you, or even like are not autobiographical but are still personal to you and things like that. So that's I kind of recalibrated and I went that way. Like I was like, okay, well, this is the way I'm going to go. I'm going to try and use comics, this medium I grew up with, but I'm going to use it to explore myself and topics that interest me, things like that. So yeah, I was like 20 years old, and then because I remember I rented those documentaries, the documentary and the movie from like a Blockbuster video that was next to my house, which sounds very antiquated to people younger than me.
Yeah. I think I think I rented the Crumb one, but I think I saw American Splendor in the cinema.
Yeah,
Like,
it was pretty good.
yeah, it was great. It was great.
I mean,
I would,
yeah, the copies I never returned those. I still have those DVDs, but the Blockbuster case,
well, I don't think they're going to be coming after you for them.
I don't think so either.
I think you're okay there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would challenge to say the idea that when you said about the personal work, I think anything that does not work for hire
Mhm.
is personal work. So like it doesn't have to be like, autobiographical in that respect, because
Sure.
it's what sort of drives us to choose to take the time that we have. And it's so interesting how you say that about those two creators in particular. And reading your graphic novel, like that's an individual who in so many ways the same kind of thing, like someone who is like driven to say their thing and damned everything else. Like it's just, this is what it's going to be. And like that might be the definition of art, an expression.
You talking about Joseph Smith?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Like there's how many artists who like struggle, and I'm not calling him an artist, but what I'm saying is like how many creators do you have in life who are like, they hit this wall and they just keep on going, adversity hits and you come back, adversity hits and come back.
Yeah.
And so what is that part within someone, that makes them go? And I think your book is a kind of an exploration in some way, but not an editorial exploration of it, like you're not sort of saying this is what I think it is. Like you're trying to be like, here's what it was,
Mhm.
and the information that I have. But then it becomes our job to kind of like sort of piecemeal these parts together and say, what is it that you feel from this or believe in this?
Yeah, that's right. I didn't want to take a side on it. I just wanted to portray it, and then at the end of the story, somebody can decide how they feel about it, if there's any truth in their religion and things like that.
Mhm.
I don't know how successful I was in that. I think I don't know. I mean, it's kind of, I've seen people criticize it because it wasn't reverential enough to Joseph Smith.
Okay.
Um, but those are people that are in the church, and that they would settle for nothing less than
Sure.
and that it's their profit. So I've seen some of those reviews, but I really did. I really felt like I was objective as much as I could be
Oh,
growing up in it and stuff. But the one thing that I said a few times about that is that, because talking about Joseph Smith as like an artist, it's like I never thought about it like that. But the Book of Mormon, I felt like is valuable as like an American, like as far as like American history goes, and as like a text, because even if you don't believe that it is true, it's still a work of automatic writing in the same way that like Naked Lunch is. It's just from the 19th century, because it's still somebody who is just has his head in a hat and is just saying a story out loud that's being written down.
Yeah.
So that's really fascinating to me. I don't think, and there's a lot of people I've seen that are just like, they just say like basically destroy it, get rid of the Book of Mormon's trash and all this. I understand like it's pretty heavy stuff for a lot of people, but there is value to it, and at least that way, like it is interesting. Like if you tried to read it, you're like, this is, and it's like written in like King James verse. Like,
Right.
it's very strange, but yeah, it's fascinating. I'm really fascinated by it. And anyway, the short thing I want to say is just that I feel like the Book of Mormon has value.
Yeah, I no, I there in no way like is the work that you've done any sort of like lifting up or throwing down of the
Yeah.
subject.
No,
It,
yeah, I just didn't want to diminish it. I'm not, and I don't think the publisher would want me to write a
no,
anti-religious screed either, because they don't want to deal with that. It's more interesting to just create something that's so straightforward and objective, and just let the reader read it. Here's the American history. Here's this story, and then what do you think about it?
yeah. And I don't think it is nearly as known. I mean, I don't think I knew the majority of the elements in there. I knew sort of like the sort of the big gestures, and I kept going like, I'm like,
South
okay,
episode.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. So when you're 20 and you're like, hey, you see these movies and you're influenced by these sort of I guess mass media, reinterpretations of, what the smaller media of, the cartooning is. Like, what did you say, like, what was your self-talk in that sense of like, okay, what am I going to do here? Was a question posed to you or what?
What am I going to do here? Like, as far as like change up of medium or something, or
Yeah, I mean, in the terms like, I mean, like, because like if you're at 20 and you're sort of hit with this and you go, oh, I've got, did you say I've got to do something, or
yeah.
hey, here's what I should do with that idea that's been banging in the back of my head for 3 years?
Well, I didn't really have any ideas for like books, but I knew that cartooning looked like a lot of fun, and it seemed like, although this turned out to be a big joke, it seemed like you can make a living doing that. Uh,
Right.
and I, at the time, I didn't go to college. I was just working at like a bagel shop, and I didn't have any plans for my future or anything really. I mean, I just kind of was like gonna be a bohemian painter or something. I just had no direction. I was ready, so I was primed for that kind of influence and direction. I mean, basically that was it. Like I just saw a path that I could take, and I felt like I had the skill set to get there, which was just I'm going to be like an alternative cartoonist, and I'm
Mhm.
going to just do whatever I want, and I'm going to make a living from it.
Well, did you see like, because it's an interesting thing. Like I went to school with a few people who are definitely really great alternative cartoonists,
Mhm.
and um, like I don't know if you know who Sam Henderson is, but Sam
Of course,
Henderson,
yeah,
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 yeah. So Sam was one of the people I went to school with, and Sam's great. He's
yeah.
brilliant. He's hilarious. But man, like the second I met Sam, like I knew, like, oh, Sam is like he is that person. He saw the world in his own eye and interpreted it, on paper how he did things. And and I was fascinated with that, and so like but like I'd assume like Sam has an internal dialogue that's saying, okay, well that's what you're doing, but here's what I see you're actually doing. Did
Yeah.
did your mind operate like that? Because it's really like a unique way of looking the world.
Well, I related to those two movies.
Mhm.
I really related to that sort of feel like an outsider.
Yeah.
Like I felt like an outsider at the time. I still kind of do, and so I felt like I could see things from an outsider's perspective, and I could comment on them.
Yeah.
Like I didn't, I remember being a teenager and like realizing what MTV was actually doing and like how fake everything was, and being
Right.
outraged by it, and then being outraged at everybody around me that was buying into it. Uh, so like that was the perspective that I had on it. But like as far as like being a cartoonist, once I decided I wanted to be a cartoonist, I knew that I could draw goofy stuff, but
Mhm.
I didn't know, the whole other part of it is like storytelling. And I remember I had some computer paper, and I was like trying to work it out how I was going to do this. I wrote this story called Pep the Dog Goes on a Date.
Okay.
First comic story I tried to draw at that stage where I realized I wanted to be a cartoonist as like a direction for my life. and it worked. Like I was like, I just wrote it out, drew the story out, and then when I was done with it, I realized like I actually had a story, like it had a beginning, middle, and end.
Right.
It wasn't something that I was conscious of when I was creating it. It was something that came out because I had internalized so much crap, so many comic books as a kid, and I saw so many movies that like I had in my head, I already knew how a story works.
Yeah.
And so that after I did that, I realized like, oh yeah, okay, so I can do this. Like this is not going to be a struggle. This is something. This is like an art form that I'm ready for, or that I'm made for, or that I was, that I already was before I even knew it. Like I already knew I was a cartoonist before I even realized it.
Right.
So like in just even the stuff that I was attracted to as a kid was all the stuff that was going to inform what I did as an adult. So it's like a cartoonist by birth or something. There's just like some wire in the brain.
Well, I had this odd sort of like philosophy. I don't know philosophy, but it's a theory like that the world's greatest surfer will never see the ocean. Like they will be born and raised, but they'll never gotten a chance to see the ocean. Like the statistic numbers of whoever could be the best at whatever it is will never see the thing that they could actually do the most.
Mm-hmm.
And it's getting that chance to, put the pencil in your hand or put the surfboard under your feet. Like that's the thing that changes it. And like, they never got that trip where they saw the ocean and they said, what's that? I want to try that. Yeah. And like for you, not that you didn't know it existed, but it's sort of like, you're like, oh, that's the thing. Like somebody can do this. It's a thing to be done. I want to do this. And you then picked up, the tools to do it. And as so many people who do this thing of, making comics, there's this internalization of storytelling that happens, at a young age, which, like we take it for granted. Like there's this sort of like, of course you can tell a story visually, right?
Yeah.
Tell a story on paper, right? Because it's all the same thing. Like how do you, but like, I don't think the rest of the world operates in that same fashion. They don't look at things and absorb them on the sense of what the needs are for characters and for beats and for plot. Like these things are they're valuable, but they're not like there's not a little sign that pops up and says like here's the turn.
But it's very intuitive. So like if I'm working on, I think you mentioned earlier about like the different ways of working on stories and like when you talk about like there's a structured way in which you go, and then there's like what I call the stumble through method. Yes. The way that I go.
Yep.
I just kind of go like that's my destination for this story, and then I just go forward and just try and get there. So like right now I'm working on a story that I know what the ending is and I know the characters, but as I'm going, I don't necessarily know how I'm going to get there.
Yep.
Things keep popping up and I go, okay, well, this is going to be an element of the story now. Now this is going to be an element of the story. I just keep drawing and keep writing, and then things, and I don't even know why I'm putting these elements in there. They're just there. But I know that when I need a way out of something, I've written myself into a corner, or I need to do some problem solving. Some of those elements that I introduced earlier are going to help me out in the future.
Totally.
And I don't know why that is. It's just the way the brain is like.
Did you ever play D&D growing up?
I didn't. No, that was too nerdy for me. I hated nerds.
Good business to get into, by the way. Yeah, no, it's like, but it's crazy because like I always feel like when I'm writing, like it is like D&D, like, or like if you've ever watched a fantasy quest film or movie or book or read a book, like it's this thing where like you're like handed all these things and you're like, what does this mean? This doesn't, what, it's incongruous to everything else I'm trying to do, but then all of a sudden like it fits for a reason later on.
Yeah.
And we all like to think like, oh well, of course the author knew what they were doing. Maybe not. Like they just kind of like you kind of have these things kind of pop up and you're like, well, okay, well, that's what's happening. And you let the character just keeps kind of plodding along doing their thing because they're making choices.
Mm-hmm.
you kind of let them loose in, in the environment and let them make the choices.
Well, if you create really good characters, yeah, then sometimes they write themselves.
Oh, for sure.
You're
Yeah.
just there to, you're like on a leash, basically, you know.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's just like, yeah, it's like the extendo dog leash, you know, that let them run out far
Yeah,
enough. Sometimes it's like they're running to the edge, and you're like clink, you know, and you're like,
yeah.
oh, you know,
Sometimes I'm working on a scene and I'm like, this doesn't feel right, but I don't know why it doesn't.
yeah,
Like this is pretty interesting, right? But I'm still feeling like I have kind of a bad feeling about what I just wrote or something, and then I find out later on, like, oh, that's because that it's like there was like a fork in the road, and I just chose the wrong road
right,
there. So let me just hack that limb off, and like we'll go this way now. And then
yeah,
it's because sometimes you don't know why you're doing what you're doing at all. Like why, why are these characters at a skate park? This is so now I have to write about skate. This is kind of weird. You realize like, oh, God, good thing I introduced that skate park.
yeah,
Now
yeah.
in the first place, it just
Yeah, but who know, yeah, but then you sort of have to let it run its course to see where that takes, because it could definitely become a part of whatever that, you know, the plot line happens with the characters, you know, like you might end up having like the skaters come back into play later on. You never know. It's a
you
thing.
need you need a character to be missing during a scene. Well, they're at the skate park that we introduced earlier, so
Right. Okay, it's like right, exactly, because you're definitely not naming a place that we haven't been yet, so we can
yeah,
all accept that bit of reality.
yeah.
Yeah. So, were you writing when you started off early? Did you write scripts, or did you just sort of like, you know, doodle write?
Well, I was doing, I was very young, so like all of my stuff was very like there's this like wise guy period that a lot of cartoonists go through when they're young, which is just basically I'm gonna do stuff that's offensive and irritate people, and that's how I'll get attention.
Yeah.
All you really want is attention. You just want people to look at you. So all I was really doing were like one-page comics that were just like making fun of like Britney Spears or something at the time. I don't
Sure.
know, like these horrible comics. And then I would send them out to. I mean, I made a lot of submissions to Mad Magazine and different small press publications and stuff, just trying to
Mhm.
get my work published. It was just terrible. It was terrible. There was like a bunch of newspapers in Denver that I was getting stuff published in that were, I don't know. So yeah, it was just basically nothing could be reprinted now. It's just awful.
Did you grow up in the Denver area, or does that just happen to be
I
the
I want I yeah, just spent some years there. I was there for maybe like 10 years or something.
spent some years there?
Yeah, yeah. I was there for 10 years.
It's like prison.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, definitely became.
yeah,
It was fun to get out of there. That's for sure.
youth. There you go, the prison of youth.
Yeah.
Um,
So basically, yeah, I wasn't taking it very seriously. Like I was just basically just thinking, like I was following the model of like the underground cartoonists. Like you just
uh-huh.
do a bunch of big one-page comics that are just kind of rude, and then you'll be like this punk artist or something.
Mhm.
Uh, but then eventually when I started trying to take it more seriously and write stories that were going to be good, like that was I did my quotes. I
Mhm.
uh, I never wrote anything out. I would have like a notebook, and I would write just basically like a skeleton outline of the
Yeah.
story, and then that would be my script, and then I would just go forward and write it and redraw stuff if it needed to be redrawn.
Yeah. It's interesting how the sort of writing process early on is very much like this linear sort of like action, 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 action kind of thing.
Mhm.
Did you develop a process, and do you still, or have you developed a process of collection? Because like that seems to be like the biggest hurdle for writing, is like not letting those ideas that sort of appear all the time, um, let them go, so do you have a collection technique for your work?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was just writing some stuff last night. This little weird story. You're talking about just like writing down these like little odd
Yep.
things. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I write down little stories, ideas all the time.
Yeah.
Uh, speaking of skate parks, like I wrote down one that's like this. Skateboarding is this industry that you age out of by the time you're like 25, basically.
Right.
And I just wrote down like a story idea for somebody who is like 27 years old or whatever, and it's like they're down to like their last sponsor.
Oh no. Yeah.
And they're about to compete in like a skate competition. It's like everything, basically their entire career relies on this skate competition. And how it's like I don't know anything really more about it, but it's like that. It's basically like that movie The Wrestler, but it's about skateboarding.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's pulled back so that it's it's somebody who's actually very young to everybody else, but within that stupid industry that they've chosen, it's like they're an old timer.
Yeah.
Because I remember I grew up skateboarding, so it's like I remember we'd see somebody that was like 21 or something, like, oh, look at this old person here. What are they doing?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, talk about an activity of youth, I mean, like, it's not, it is not the one where somebody picks up a board, in their 20s saying like, you know what, I think I'm going to start skateboarding.
Yeah, no, hopefully not. Otherwise,
pick up a surfboard. At least the water doesn't hurt as much.
Mm-hmm.
Although the bottom of the ocean does not feel good when the wave pushes you down on top of it. But, that's one thing.
This is off topic, but I'm kind of interested for just living in Asheville. Do you even go to the beach? Do you guys go to the beach at all?
Yes, we do. It is a long, long journey to get to the beach from Asheville. We have family in Charleston.
Okay.
So we will make the 6-hour trek to Charleston, and we have a family friend in St. Simon's Island who just the other day, my wife was saying, we need to go visit them. And I'm like, all right. So she's like 5.5 hours away. I'm like, okay. Like, yeah, it's no small task, but
well, that's right. That's where living in Columbia beats you, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
You go to the beach pretty easily.
Yeah, you're like what? You're like 2.5 hours away.
Yeah, it depends on what island you want. We went
to
Edisto is like I think 2 hours away or something.
Right. Okay. So yeah, she wants to go camping on Edisto like mad. She just
man, you got to before summer's over. And you're running out of time.
Yeah, well, maybe next summer. Yeah, it's definitely one of the sort of like the punch list things to do. So, yeah, it's it's not. Speaking of South Carolina, you didn't do the South Carolina Comic-Con in like April?
No, I didn't do that one. There's one coming up this month though.
Right, they're doing like the mini version.
I'll go to it, but I only really do shows that I'm invited to.
Yeah,
I can't afford to just keep buying tables and hotel rooms and stuff.
Yeah. No, it's well. The nice thing about that one is that it's an hour away, so it's just a quick hop down there for for me. Yeah, I know. I mean that's the big balance, like balancing this comic career thing and like presentation. Like how do you get because the shows are great for getting yourself to a public that just doesn't know you exist.
Yeah. No, I love doing that stuff. I mean, I had such a great time at Heroes Con. So I don't have a table at the Comic-Con here, but I'm just going to go and walk around and.
Oh, cool.
People.
Yeah, I think it's still on my calendar. So we'll have to get an overpriced beverage and catch up there. So. I'm going to hop around, but like we're talking about the script writing, blah blah blah. But like, this book, has a publisher. This book isn't sort of self-promoted piece of work. So what was your intention? Like, I mean, you're like, hey, I've got this idea, and then like, was this an idea that just kind of germinated, and then someone's like, well, you need to go talk to a publisher, or like, did you say I need to talk to a publisher? How did that go for you?
Well, I've only worked with. I mean, I work with Fantagraphics usually, a publisher out of Seattle, and they call themselves the publisher of the world's greatest cartoonists.
Nice. Well done.
They publish, Charles Schultz, and stuff like that. But they're still pretty small time. So for this book, I knew that if I was going to work on it, I was going to need an advance, and like a sizable advance. So that was my idea. Like I'm gonna have to work with a bigger publisher to pull off something like this because it's just gonna take so much time. So I have a friend who had done a graphic novel. He did his name is Back Durf, and he did a graphic novel called My Friend Dahmer.
Okay.
Through Abrams, and so he linked me up with them to be the publisher of this project because this is a book that I'd been circling around for years, but I just was never at a place where I felt like I could do it properly. I didn't have the skills yet. I wasn't good enough. So I had a lot of failed attempts at it. But then around 2017, I was like, okay, I think now I can do this. I think I can I'd already been doing the research for a while and stuff like that. And so I just wrote to this publisher, this editor, and made a little book pitch, all that stuff. And they said, okay. It's not a very exciting story, but
no. So I'm going to tease out a few things in this because I think there's sort of information in here that is buried in the experience, because you might have either not realized what you were doing or whatever. But did you have experience making a book pitch to begin with?
Did I experience? I'm sorry. What?
Were you experienced in making book pitches up to that point?
No, I wasn't really, because working with Fantagraphics, I'd known they knew who I was just from seeing my work in different anthologies and things like that. So I didn't really have to pitch it. I mean, a pitch to them would be like an email that says, "Hey, here's what I'm drawing right now. Do you want to publish it?" Right. It's very simple, straightforward. Once you're in with them, they know you. They like you as an artist. They want to work with you. They just want to know what you're working on, and if they can help with it.
Sure.
So this was my first time making a pitch, but even my pitch was very simple. It was just one drawing,
okay, and
a list of the events in Justice Smith's life that I was going to cover.
Okay.
And that's all it was. And and my own history in the church. So I explain why I'm the artist to do this story and what it means to me personally. And things.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a big thing. And I guess, for anybody who is watching or listening, maybe they don't know your sort of relationship with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So maybe you can just kind of give a quick.
Yeah. Well, quickly, I was raised in the church. My family goes back very far in the church, to the 1800s. So it's pretty important. Then my mother lost her faith, and my parents divorced. And since I was young, I was about 12, so I was with my mother after the divorce, and she kind of influenced myself and the younger siblings in my family we all left the church. I was always curious about it. I was always interested in what it was all about, and exploring it. So this was my chance to go back and revisit that faith and see if I educated myself on it, where it came from and stuff, and I would find out that it was true for me or something, reclaim that faith, basically. So that's what the whole project was all about for me.
That's really, really interesting. And it's so, so there's a couple of things that I think are really pivotal. One is that that age of 12 to me is a really important age in our lives. I think our interests and sort of curiosities sort of lock in at that point in our life. And we're so these are the things that kind of we carry for the rest of our life, which is kind of oh, you'll always love whatever that is that you were into back then.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for that to be that transitional period of your sort of your familial and social relationship with the church, and then that's taken sort of out of your life, and the subject maybe being a taboo subject in your home at that point, it becomes this sort of looming specter,
That's exactly right. And yeah, I mean, once you're taken out of this thing that you were raised with, I was very confused and very angry as a teenager. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It was just really important for me to go back and figure all this stuff out, sort it out, and hopefully it would.
Where were you in the food chain of the kids, I guess?
I'm number 8 of 9.
Okay. Okay. So you're okay. So you have a fair amount of elder siblings in that sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, they stayed in the church. I mean, a lot of them,
Right.
so it really did split the family. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, I have older siblings, so like that, like it, and so when the divorce happens, like there is this fracturing, and like you kind of like whatever that sort of relationship kind of changes, and at whatever age it is, and and there are these sort of like, I don't know if the word forced sort of events that happen in life beyond that period where you are all kind of back together, or versions of you are back together. You get this kind of weird sort of like connection, that sort of isn't sort of consistent, or as sort of like open and nurturing as it felt when it was, you know,
Oh,
yeah, it's weird.
I
Um,
think divorce, at that young age, being raised in a big family and having all those memories and being a part of that, when that ended, it definitely left me with this kind of family complex,
mhm,
because I think me not being in the church, it definitely had an effect on my relationship with my dad. So because my dad is very devout,
right.
once you're no longer in the church, it's kind of I think that they discourage having relationships. Like if your family members leave the church, that you kind of have to be shunned a little bit.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
felt like I was shunned anyway, and so
Yeah.
I spent most of my teens and adulthood looking for like father figures, and looking for like people to help guide me through things that a dad normally would.
Right.
And it gave me a family complex in the way that like I was always looking for a group that I could fit into,
Mhm.
that would fill in the role that my own family used to have when it was all together. Because it
Yeah.
was just, after the divorce, it was just chaos. Like I mean, it was I was a kid just out in the street. My mom was working so hard just to support the the kids that were still living with her, that basically nobody was looking after any of us. So we were all over the place.
Mhm.
Um, all of this chaos, all these things are really good for the mind of somebody if they're going to be like artistic, like if they're going to go into the arts.
Yeah.
It's good because it warps you a little bit and you
Yeah.
get weird experiences. Like I hung out with some seedy people in Arizona and stuff. Just I did some terrible stuff. And
Right.
all of those things wouldn't have happened if I had been raised in the church. I'm sure I'd be, married at 18 and I'd have a million kids of my own and stuff like that at this point. But so for the purpose of making a cartoonist, it was a really good thing that happened.
Yeah.
But it definitely left me constantly searching, uh, and looking to start a family of my own or something.
Yeah.
And then that just leads to all sorts of awful experiences.
Sure.
You
Yeah.
can't, you really can't force something like that. It just has to happen. If it's
You
gonna
can't Yeah, you can't sublimate, people in relationships, like there are things, and it's like, yeah, and it's like, it's interesting because like we've all had like, we're of a generation, we're of the divorce generation, like where the first waves of the parents splitting, and like, so you grew up with a lot of kids around you whose families were, broken in one way or the other. And it was just really, it was really weird to see like how everybody, like in retrospect, how all these different kids handled it,
Yeah,
if you weren't afforded an outlet in life, then it becomes a danger, you know like it's like that's the big thing, is like whatever that thing is that you can kind of like channel your energy into,
yeah,
a much healthier thing in the long run. And as long as it's not bringing harm to others or yourself. uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So like it's super interesting, and like I'm also really really curious about like, you know we're always, it seems like we're always very afraid to talk about the things that we screwed up on, like, that, like, so like, or air quote failures of whatever they were, and like you said that you had like false starts, on this project. um like, what did they look like to you? Did they look like, okay, here it is, and you just started like making pages, and then you just hit a wall and you're like, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to go with this?
Yeah, well, I had used, I didn't. So yeah, basically, I rushed into it, knowing that I wanted to do a graphic novel on Joseph Smith's life
Mhm.
and the founding of the church, but I didn't have the patience to pull back and really learn about it before I jumped into it, like to actually do reading and visit the sites and all those things that I wound up doing later on. So I would just jump in. I didn't even do sketches about like what, here's what Joseph Smith's going to look like. I was just like, it was all passion and not, and no,
Process.
yeah, no process. So yeah, so I have all these false starts that were just, you
Sounds
know,
like sounds like early stages of making love.
yeah, just basically just like, looking at the Wikipedia page basically and trying to illustrate that.
Right.
And it's like,
Right.
what am I going to gain from why am I even doing this? Like, if I'm going to take this seriously, I need to wait until I can actually take it seriously. And plus, my drawing skills have not plateaued yet. Every project that I do, I'm a little bit better at as an artist.
Mhm.
So I just wasn't there yet. Like, I'm still not there. I'm still not the cartoonist that I want to be, and
Right.
that I'm working towards. So back then, we're talking 10 years ago or something. It's like you look at the stuff that I was doing when I was trying to work on this project. I'm like, thank God I didn't keep going.
Thank God no someone didn't say yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was using shortcuts. I was doing a lot of captions and narration and stuff. Things that like I totally threw out for this actual book
Right.
because that is just basically like I don't really want to draw that. Let me just write it. Here's what happens, and that solves that problem. It's very important when I worked on the actual book that everything that happens needs to be happening through dialogue or
Mhm.
through visuals, so that you're a fly on the wall. You're watching this stuff happen. These are real life events. You're there with them. You're in the room. I'm not. I'm not some. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm not. I'm not guiding you anyway. Really.
Right.
So.
How did you get I mean, so, like, how did you find like, what was your sort of value of source material that you were drawing from? And then where did you say, "Okay, I'm stopping here, and now I'm gonna sort of elaborate," like, because I can't believe that, your dialogue wasn't already written. So, like, you had to kinda, like, come to voices of what who these characters were and what they would say to each other. And, like, we're using an interpretive sort of way to kind of connect dots, like, here's what happened, and here's where things started. Now, here's a series of sort of, like, people exchanges to get to that point.
Yeah, sometimes it was like that. But I was reading a lot of books, and there's a lot of letters. I mean, the best thing about doing history, a book on the history of the church, is that a lot of the history of the church is documented. Like they have all sorts of material, and it's all very available. So I read there's some books called the Joseph Smith Papers. They're like a lot of his correspondence and things like that. So I was fortunate enough to be able to look through that stuff and then basically interpret it into how it would be, how it would look if as it was happening. So I would have a notebook and I would just go to a coffee shop with a couple books and I would read about a scene in particular that I knew I had to include, and I would cross reference those scenes, how like each writer wrote about them. I had a friend who worked for an LDS book publisher, and
Mhm.
he was very intelligent. He helped me a lot with that stuff. Then if I was stuck somewhere, I would have a conversation with my father on the phone and tell him what I was trying to work on. He would try and give me some advice. So I just had all sorts of resources, and I just read a lot of books um, and pieced it together in that way. And then for photo reference, like I said, like I just traveled to the sites where the things were set, where they were set.
Yeah.
Took illegal photographs and stuff.
So, yeah, surreptitiously, yeah, documenting this stuff. I mean, like, yeah, because I mean, I'm assuming that, like, that temple,
Mhm.
the last one in the book is, like, it's still there. Like,
Oh,
that,
yeah. Uh-huh.
yeah, like, it's kinda cool, like, that there the reason I say that the very sort of way out there, maybe not too out there considering the subject of the book, like my wife and I went to Southern Ohio to visit like the Indian ruin sites, which are
Yeah.
just unbelievably cool. And like, you know, like there's one city we found we found it. You can all be impressed. No, but it was like, it's like in a state park, and there's nothing, like there's one sign, but you have to like go hiking and go up on this hill, and like you can figure it out. Like you can orient yourself, but it's like a forest.
Yeah, yeah. I've
Yeah.
done the same thing. I went in Ohio. I found some native mounds,
Hmm.
and there's all sorts of weird, and there were more. And that was something that was interesting when I was working on the book. Is that you're thinking about the time period, what the landscape would have looked like, and how confusing that would have been for the people, and how that informed this religion in a certain way, because this is sort of New England area and stuff. There's a lot of Native American mounds
Yep.
all over the place. And nobody knew what they were. Nobody knew who the natives were. That was a big thing that people were trying to solve. I felt like this is a country where people are coming and they're bringing their Christianity, but then how does this Christianity relate, or how does this land relate to their Christianity?
Sure.
How do all these things tie together? And then in a certain way, the early church, the early LDS church really solved a lot of those problems. It told you who the Native Americans were, where they came from.
Mhm.
Native mounds were piles of bodies from battles that had been waged all over the landscape,
Right.
with dirt, which solved a lot of problems, because people would go and dig into those mounds and they'd find actual skeletons and wearing gold and all sorts of things, because they were pillaging those mounds all the time.
Yeah.
There's way less. There used to be a lot more of them on that landscape, and a lot of them are gone because people just dug them out. They'd buy some farmland and there'd be a big mound. They'd dig into it. So, and then that was the whole thing. Like Joseph and his family were making money with the peepstone and helping people locate lost treasure and stuff like that. It was people had a very magical worldview back then.
Sure.
So anyway, I don't really know why I'm going on a tangent, but it's just basically like all those things about early America, it all comes together, and it's perfect for this new religion, which is sort of like an Americanized Christianity.
Well, yeah, I mean, how, like, I mean, it's like, it's sort of that, it's like manifest destiny, like there's this value, like we have to place ourselves in a sense of value to our actions. So like, like, hey man, like if you travel this giant ocean and you get to the other side of this ocean, there happens to be this whole beautiful unspoiled land, and you can kind of make your way into it and do what you want, and sort of, you can start a bank, you can run for president, like you can do all these things that you couldn't do back, in the lands that your forefathers came from. So this is an impressive opportunity. So, but the question is sort of this sort of existential of like, well, why am I here? And if religion is sort of baked into your daily expression, well, then it has to be something to do from God. Like
it has to be, and God is here with us, and
right.
Jesus Christ visited America, and the Garden of Eden is in Missouri. It's all these.
Sure.
This is a very important. God is watching us. This is God's country. All these.
Yep.
I mean, it's so interesting.
It is. I mean, it's super fascinating, and so getting, sitting and reading through this, I'm like, oh yeah, of course. It's not just this, this thing where you say, oh, this is just a crazy person's sort of, adventure, or this is a completely manna from heaven. Like this is humanity, and how people survive, and how they sort of interpret the world, and what is there, and what do they do within it, and these, I get it. And and I think that, what we said about being a very non-judgmental approach to it, I think that really does make this accessible.
Yeah.
As a work.
Well, when you're reading this graphic novel, I think what you're going to discover is that the religion did not come about as like one day it exists and one day all of a sudden there's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You're watching it form. Things are coming into it that are now a part of it. They take on this guy Sidney Rigdon, who is a very powerful orator and has his own church and has his own religion and stuff. He brings all his followers. So now it's just like it's growing, and then somebody brings in their rules, and then it's getting bigger, and somebody brings in their motivations, and now that becomes a motivation of the churches, and all the, I think the one mistake I made, I think something that bothers me is that I didn't, as far as storytelling goes, I showed a lot of people who were against the church in the book, but I feel like I didn't do a good enough job explaining what their motives for hating the church was.
Right.
I wish that I had done that more. I wish I'd focused more on that. And I had some pages like that where it's people sitting around a tavern, it's like commiserating on with this, all these church members are invading their town and stuff. But it just felt too heavy-handed, so I got rid of it. And now, when I look back on it, I'm like, yeah, but now I just have like a bunch of ugly people saying they hate Joseph Smith and they're going to kill him and stuff. And I wish I didn't include it.
Yeah. I mean, like I think I read somewhere how you had originally proposed this book to be X amount of pages long, and then you like contacted the editor saying it's got to be a lot longer.
Yeah, and that was, man, the page count just kept ballooning.
Yeah,
even longer. There was so much stuff I had left out.
Well, I think that might. I mean, listen, as a person who whose novel went up to 200,000 words and winnowed it down back to 150, like it's the nature of the beast, man. Like, and I would only think in a biographical work, it becomes, because you really your balancing act is so much heavier because it impacts the real world view. And it's because you can't just make something up and say, well, this is what happened.
Yeah, right. Well, you're also, I was also very mindful of, this is biographical, but it still needs to be a story. Like,
right.
Everybody's life isn't fit to just be written down and work as a 3-act structure. You have to really cherry pick. So, like the movie about Ray Charles, it's like, Ray Charles' actual life, it's all that stuff. It's like very complicated. Johnny Cash's life is very complicated. He didn't just like get clean and sober at the end of it. It's like it was just a constant struggle or whatever. So, if you're a story about somebody, you really have to cherry pick events to fit a specific narrative. And the only narrative I really had was poor kid, from a family of terrible farmers, builds a religion at the end that becomes persecuted and hated until he's martyred at the end.
Yeah.
And that was just basically like, okay, well, that's the straight line I have to get to. But there's all sorts of twists and turns, and you go, okay, but I need to stay on target here. Like, this is it.
For sure. And it was, it was interesting how like you kept weaving in the sort of the bad choices in a sense, like, okay, well, we're going to start a bank, or we're like, like, I don't want to be considered like, a full, someone who's cheating on his wife. So I'm going to make up, like, this is going to be the new way it's going to be, because I have evidence here in the Bible. So let's just make it a thing.
Yeah. Right.
That's like, like, these are the humanity, the human aspects, and like, I don't think it's like, I don't say like the bank thing is a bad thing. I think what it is like, it's a business, and like, how do you keep this business afloat? How do you keep this, and that was the sort of the effort, like, well, we could do this and it could have worked out perfectly, but there were powers at play that were working against them. And
how do you support all these people? Like, you have all these members coming to be in your community. You don't actually have the land for all these people to live on. So it's like, well, we can try to figure out a way to buy this land. It just keeps ballooning and ballooning.
For sure. Yeah.
Try and solve that problem, you just get yourself into more hot water.
I thoroughly expected Jimmy Stewart to come in at some point and solve the problem at one point.
That would have been great.
Yeah, when the secret lost pages of the graphic novel, yeah. Jimmy Stewart. Oh no, it's a whole thing. Surprise! I know your editor, Charlie,
okay.
the amazing Charlie Cockman. So Charlie, is super close with my old college friend and post-college roommate, Eric Dozier. And Eric used to work with Charlie back when Charlie was at DC Comics.
Oh, okay.
And our first summer in our apartment in Hell's Kitchen, it was blazingly hot. And we weren't like, we moved in probably like late spring or mid-spring, and we weren't smart enough to buy air conditioners at the point. So we were like, la di da da da, and then like the temperature just goes pins through the roof. We had the top floor apartment, so our apartment was 100 degrees if it was, 50 degrees. And we would sit there at our drawing tables with paper just stuck to our arms. Like, it was super non-conducive to actually being a productive artist. And so Eric called Charlie up and he's like, yeah, sure. And so for, I don't know how long it was until we could get the air conditioners purchased, delivered, and a power lines put in, because they needed to run lines up because the building was so old. Like, it would just blow the circuit breaker when you put them in. So the statute of limitations have worn off here, so no one's going to get in trouble. But we worked in the DC offices. They had this whole wing that was where they put like Dick Giordano and Joe Orlando and all these like sort of venerable employees of the business who weren't part of the day-to-day editorial staff. And they had these beautiful offices where there was a library. And Charlie's like, just come in here in the morning, just call me when you're coming over. And so we went over every morning for, I think, like 2 weeks. And we'd go there, we'd buzz him on the phone. He'd come over, open the side door, and we'd walk in and go sit down with our paper and pencils and whatever. And we would sit there and draw our, whatever assignments. I'm like working on Marvel pages while I'm sitting in the DC library. For a couple of weeks. So Charlie's the man.
He is great. Yeah, I do like Charlie a lot.
Yeah. So, and truly, so like, I mean, Charlie had to like pull his, his magic wand out when you're saying, hey, this story's going to get big.
Yeah. I mean, and then when I turned the story in, he was like, oh, this is a lot of pages. But then I was like, yeah, but I still need to write like a notes section too, even bigger than that.
Yeah.
He was totally cool about it. There was no, and he didn't shorten the book at all. He didn't remove any pages.
Amazing.
And it couldn't have been. I mean, I don't even know like what stuff I feel like would be good to remove. Even the pages of like just nature.
Right.
Those are there for a reason. That's all for pacing, that's
totally.
That's a purpose.
And this is actually one of them. Like, you have those, there are these interstitial sort of pages which are just landscapes.
Mm-hmm.
And they're these, and they don't even have type on them. They're just like, here's a piece of artwork. I saved this one because Joseph reminds me of like Conan O'Brien in that shot.
Oh, I can see that. I've never heard that before. That's good.
Tall hair, like it's just like like if Conan was doing a bit, where he had to be old timey, like there's Conan in an old timey outfit. Yeah, no, this one was this the one? No, not this one. That was I love this page, by the way. It's beautiful, nice textures. Yeah, very Van Gogh with the waving lines. This is it. So this is what I first noticed, and I think it is the first. So I loved the usage of, you did the crayons for the background.
Yeah.
I love that. Like, was it like a symbol of fall for you? Like, because I think like I don't know, like when you chose to use it or not, but like it's throughout the book. I think you used the same piece of artwork and you just sort of moved it and centered it and scaled it to like, fit in the background. It's totally cool. I love that fact.
Oh, thanks. Was it it just sets the mood. I guess it is fall time. I don't know. The coloring, I have a whole philosophy about my coloring, which is that it should be as loose as the art.
Mm-hmm.
So my line quality is very loose, and I don't want my coloring to seem like it's fixing or is in contrast to the line work. So it has to be a little messy, a little painterly as well. And the sky, adding a texture like that.
Right.
Seems suitable. And
how do you like on a project this large, how do you and I'll use the term and then I'll redefine it, but like, how do you handle mission creep? So like in the terms of like, you're doing the artwork, and the artwork, as you said, like had your artwork plateaued or whatever, like how do you like go like, oh, I'm doing this differently, I need to consciously not do it differently, like staying on model, rendering technique, whatever the thing might be. How did you handle that?
Well, the stuff that I drew in the beginning of the book didn't make it into the. I had to keep going back and redrawing a lot of things
Mm.
as I was going along because my art style would change,
Yep.
characters would change, and that's not something you do consciously. It just happens from drawing the same thing over and over again. It just like there's slight altercation, or what is it, alterations.
Operation, yeah.
Yeah, that happened, and then before you know it, it accumulates, and the character looks completely different. So I had to constantly go back and change things, and but then I'd also like learn new details, and I'd have to go back and redraw something and add that detail in there.
Okay.
Yeah, so like the page you showed of that with the sky
Yep.
was drawn 2018, I think, and
All
then
right.
the page that you showed of Emma in that page was drawn 2020, even
Okay.
though that page happens before
Right.
the page in the story, just because I was constantly going back and fixing things and rewriting things.
Wow.
And I knew that I needed to give Emma more space in that chapter that's kind of devoted to her. It wasn't originally really. You didn't really get to know her as well as I felt like you needed to at that point in the book. So I went back and rewrote that chapter and gave her more scenes, just to kind of fill her character in more.
Oh, that's great. Well, I think I think it really does pay off, especially toward the end of the book,
Mhm.
where the sort of the events between the two of them become much more charged.
Yeah.
It's not just I love you and we'll make it together,
Mhm.
Joe. It's a very different sort of expression later on.
Yeah. And since I was drawing it like straightforward, like I wasn't jumping around.
Hmm.
I remember when I got to that scene where Joseph is saying goodbye to her in the house, I knew that was like probably the last time I was going to draw her. So I felt like I was saying goodbye to her.
Oh, okay.
I remember listening to my headphones, and the song that was on Pandora was the Beach Boys' "Forever," I think is what it's called.
Okay.
And it was like so sad. I just started crying.
Wow.
I'd been working on this book with these characters for so long at that
Yeah.
point, so many years, and I put so much work into it and so much thought into it that by the time I got to a point where I was actually drawing this character who I really liked for the last time, it was like this song just happened and I got so emotional.
Yeah.
It was really sad. It was
No,
horrible.
I'm sure. Like, I mean, like we live with these characters and works that we take years to do.
Mhm.
Even if you take a year to do something, like you really do become emotionally involved with these characters.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, you feel like you know them,
yeah,
because I'm drawing them, and everything that I'm learning about them, I have to figure out why they would do that, why they would act that way, what this means ultimately.
mhm,
So I really you really do have to become the characters that you're writing. So
yeah,
so all this stuff was real to me as I'm working on it at my desk.
yeah. And I mean, there's an added level of like to it for you because these characters aren't characters; they're
Mhm.
people,
Yeah.
and they also have a sort of a rooted connection in your life.
Mhm.
So whether you knew about them to what degree before, but now it's like, okay, there's these fundamental beings.
And you know what's gonna happen. Like when Joseph is accepting his fate at the end, and he goes with his brother.
Yep.
I know where they're going. I know what's gonna happen. So
Right.
it's very dark. I'm sitting there drawing it, like, and I feel like I'm on my way to death row or something.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
This was I thought this was really interesting. How so can you kind of briefly talk about your challenge of handling these sort of the visionary panels? Like because like that's big big stuff to try to like contain in a box.
Mhm.
Um, was this method something you had early on in your head, or is it something you had to come back and kind of refine?
I didn't have it. Well, it's, you mean like as far as like the size goes and how like, I'm going to structure it? I could have
Well,
easily have made that.
using the silhouettes. I mean, you use silhouettes.
Yeah. So yeah. So the storytelling parts of it, I wanted to do in silhouettes. Like if they're going to talk about, if they're talking about a scene from the Book of Mormon, I'm not going to draw the scene. I'm
Right.
not going to illustrate the Book of Mormon. I'm going to do it in this way. It's a silhouette. And so I think for that right there, that's not from the Book of Mormon, but that's, I can't remember what that's in, maybe the Pearl of Great Price maybe or something. Or is that from the Bible? I can't remember. I'm so rusty on this. But
it was just an example I grabbed because I thought it was a really creative way of handling something that's bigger than just human events.
Yeah. So I think I just didn't want to draw anything biblical or anything from their own canon. So I had to draw it like that.
Yeah.
But then I can't remember what was my reason, because I separated that style from when they're explaining something magical that happened to them.
Yes, like the personal visions.
Yeah, I'll do that in blue line work.
Mm-hmm.
I won't color it. And that will separate it from what I'm setting up as reality, which will be the full color artwork.
Right.
Yeah, so I just needed these three things separated visually. So the blue line work is something they're saying happened and might have happened.
Yeah. Well, it's graphic design.
Is from their literature. I think
Yep.
that's what it was. I can't remember.
No, it's graphic design. You're setting up a sort of a rule system or a wayfinding system for the reader to understand like what they're going to be going. So when they first pass through it, every time they see it again, they don't have to go, because it would be like never having seen word balloons. You know what I mean? And then having to explain word balloons every single time.
Yeah, yeah. I think it works for somebody if somebody's never read a graphic novel, which like the thing about this book is that a lot of people who are reading it never read comics. It's really reaching that different audience, and I think that they pick up on that intuitively. Like, they know what I'm up to.
It reminds me of like those what is it? The Taiwanese paper like dolls, like how they tell stories against the screen. Like
yeah. Oh,
like that kind of stuff, like that. That's what I kind of like really kind of gathered when I'm reading. I'm like, oh, I like this because he's using sort of like, or shadow puppets, like using something to kind of tell the story, which is like, but I'm not being specific in what it is, like I'm just like, it's I don't know. It was a cool technique.
Well, thank you. And that was not illustrating the Book of Mormon was something that I realized I needed to not do at a certain point too, because I have some deleted scenes from the book that were just, I'm going to take parts of the Book of Mormon and draw them now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in this, in between Joseph doing whatever he's doing, here's a scene from the Book of Mormon.
Okay.
But it's just like, I don't want to do this. It's better if you just, this is a book that this guy published. You don't need to know necessarily what the whole story is. You don't need to include that stuff,
It's already out there. It's
already out there. You can seek it out. And other artists have done it. There's already been so many illustrated Book of Mormon.
Right.
An illustrated Book of Mormon comic that Mike Allred, Madman, did. So I just didn't want to take it there. I just wanted to keep it about the person who made it. So I did the first graphic novel I ever did was called The Hypo, and it was about Abraham Lincoln.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I didn't do Abraham Lincoln's presidency, and I didn't do the Civil War. I didn't do anything that Lincoln for. I just focused only on his depression. So it's like he's in Springfield, and I'm going to draw the story about his internal struggle he was going through. And I didn't include any of the politics or any of like his lawyer stuff. None of that.
Wow.
I'm just going to hyper focus in on like this mental breakdown that he had, and I like that better than trying to take on some big story. Like I'm going to focus in on like just the human part of this.
Right. Well, I mean, isn't that what makes us who we are? Like, I mean, it's those. Yeah. It is those adversities and how we engage with them, which ultimately make who we are in the end.
Yeah. This book is very human too. It's a portrait of a prophet.
Yeah. No, it totally is, and like I mean, and like your tone gets darker. as the story moves on, like, like, yeah, I mean, like, to me, like, you added a lot more texture and darkness and, as when things would not be sort of idyllic, like it
It's
was.
heavier.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of weight in in the pages when things are dark, for the followers, whomever they are in the story.
That's supposed to be, that's a charcoal on that page there,
Oh, really? Okay.
right? And it was supposed to be like frost.
Yeah. No,
That's what
that's
I was going for, but
yeah. No, I mean, no, I mean, I kept looking, saying, oh, it's because you were using some unique textures, and I'm like, oh, I wonder how, because like that's the beautiful, but that's one of the amazing things about digital coloring nowadays is you can put anything in there.
yeah. No, I don't use a lot of that. Like I'll do the flat colors in the background are digital,
Yeah.
but I put in as many, ink washes or colored
Mhm.
pencil or whatever.
Yeah, like I think is this where are the ink washes? I saw somewhere in here I saw ink washes.
Oh yeah, well that all of them have it. They're just
Yeah.
very sometimes they're pulled back a little bit. But you can see
Yep.
like on Joseph's clothing,
Yeah.
the background and stuff.
Yeah. Totally. Um, so you mentioned something earlier, and so you said that you spoke with your dad
Mhm.
about this project. So that, and his being part of the faith. I mean, how was that process for you talking with him? Because that's kind of a pretty
Well,
significant thing.
well, it was good. It helped me kind of reconnect with him for a little bit
Hmm.
because I think I think he was hoping that it would lead me back to the church. This project, I would
I'm
I would
sure.
look into it and I would find the truth and I would go back to church. But it just didn't work for me that way. And I think when he saw the book, the final book, I think he was very, very disappointed,
Oh,
um, very upset about it, and that was that. So I haven't, he never. That was it. I think that was probably the nail in the coffin of our relationship. I just
yeah.
I didn't. If you're not, you can't you can't humanize somebody that is infallible in somebody
Right.
else's eyes, and not upset
Well,
them.
that's something I thought about when reading the book is that the predominant volume of material is going to be very much pointed at one direction,
Mhm.
because if this is supporting your your story or your belief or whatever this is, you want that to be, well, this is a miracle, or this is divine intervention, this is that. So I think, like, it would be hard to kind of like, if that's all that you have available to you, it's hard to see anything otherwise.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty of.
Records, like, I guess there would be, like, you know I guess non-biased, historical records.
Yeah, that stuff is difficult to come by.
Yeah.
So you have to read it and then read the church's defense of whatever that is.
Right.
Kind of try and make up your mind about like is there a middle ground here?
Sure.
And sometimes I illustrated experience things that somebody said happened, and the person who said that happened to maybe it's not so reliable. I don't know. Like for example, I illustrated a scene in the book where supposedly Emma had poisoned
Mm.
his drink.
Mhm.
That's something that a church member said happened, had written in a letter. Um, so it's basically a rumor or it's gossip,
Right.
but it's old enough. The gossip is old enough that it might have had some validity to it. It's not something the church would say is factual or it happened. But for me, when I read it, I knew I needed to include it because it made sense for Emma's character to me. That
Mhm.
this is a person who has sacrificed so much. Well, she didn't ask for any of this. She probably would have been happy just being in a nice 19th century marriage,
Yeah.
and just having that role or something, and not she didn't want all this stuff that all this baggage. I needed her to get some kind of I needed the audience, the reader, to also feel like she wasn't just getting shit on the entire time.
Yeah.
I needed her to have some kind of payback, you know.
Yeah,
Anyway, so I included that scene, and I don't know if it really happened. Who knows if it really happened?
sure.
But there is, you know, I wrote this in my notes. Like I wrote where that came from and stuff. And it just felt right as far as like storytelling goes to include that. That's all.
Yeah, and I think well, I think I mean and that's not the only time that it's in the where she where she sort of steps up to one of the sisters, when the sister calls her Emma, and she stands and says, no, you will address me as Mrs. Smith.
Yeah.
Like she definitely asserts herself in the story,
And
where she can.
that feels so true though to me.
Yeah.
Like I don't think that, I think that the church's portrayal of Emma would be very flowery almost, or very,
Yeah.
they don't talk about what her life must have been like, what her feelings must have been like for all these things that are happening. To me, that rings way more true than like on a human level. That she would be asserting herself at a certain point and just being like, because at the end of Joseph, when Joseph was killed, it's like, what did she do after that stuff? Like it made, I don't know. I think all the evidence pointed to where I took her character anyway for me. So it seems more true than.
Yeah, no, she definitely she almost merits her own story, in some sense.
She's always doing something. I had to like make sure that if there are women in the story in the background of a scene, they're always working. They're always doing something because there's so much to do, and it's on them to do it. So if I have these guys sitting around in a room smoking cigars or whatever, it's like there's women in the background sweeping up, or taking care of babies or hanging laundry. They're never resting.
No, I'm sure there was very little rest happening for most of those people at that time. I found it to be a really compelling piece of work. So I well done, man. Like how does it feel? Like, I guess, like, are you satisfied with like the work, the labor?
Yeah, I'm very satisfied with it as a book. I think it's great. I think it worked out. I wasn't sure about it. You know how it is, like when you finish a book, you're still too close to it, so you don't know. You're like, is this a real piece of crap? I don't know what this is. But I finished it in 2020. 2020 is when I finished drawing it.
Okay.
I spent 2021 finishing coloring it and doing some edits on it and stuff. So I'm still a little close to it. My distance is enough at this point where I can kind of look at it and judge it a bit more, and I think it's good. I think that it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I think somehow it worked out, and I'm proud of it.
You should be. I mean, it really like it's I've been reading a lot of graphic novels in the last month or so, and like it was I don't feel like I'm like, oh, I wish I was reading something else. Like I've sat and I would sit and I'd read and I'd look up. I'm like, oh, I just read 70 pages. Like it was, so it was compelling. All the things I needed to be compelling, for. So
man, that makes me feel good to know, because you really don't know. My wife, I remember, even my wife hadn't read it, so it was just like sitting with this thing that like nobody has read. Like, all right.
It's no joke, man. Like when your wife sits down to read the thing that you've put all this time in to read, like it was like handing my wife my book to read was a terrifying experience. Like the scariest of all of the people reading the book.
You're watching your face the whole time. Like,
oh my gosh, yeah. Like it was, yeah. Or and it's just like you just kind of want to run away. You're like, oh, I'll just be gone, and I'll be back whenever you're done. Yeah, it's nice. But
also, if she says it's good, it's like, yeah, but can I really trust her?
Well, yeah. I mean, listen, that's the thing. Well, she handed it back with enough grammatical edits that I felt that that balanced out any sort of like sort of magical thinking in it.
Yeah.
So
my wife is really good at that too.
Yeah. Well, that's it's always good to have people better than you with that stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, hey, if you're there, go find the book. You can order, I guess you can order it from Abrams, right? Like I think there's a web page to order it, and then you can get it everywhere else.
Your bookstore. anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's cool. It's a really cool book. Like the book. Like I've seen the
Yeah.
book. It's very cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So what are you working on now? Like you mentioned that you were doing the other story.
Yeah, I don't have enough information about it that I
Yeah.
will sharing it.
I mean, is another big story? Is it smaller? Like, I mean,
It's smaller. I don't think I'll ever do anything as big as that one again. I really can't imagine. That was heinous to work on that. So
yeah.
I have a story that's it's just fiction, and I know what the ending is. I'm just trying to get there.
Nice. Well, listen, the greatest gift is having the ending before you begin.
Mhm.
You know, we don't always get that. And so sometimes you just have to go out there with a spear in hand and go hunt it down, because it's not always, it's elusive. It's
Yeah.
an elusive beast, and it fights back. So
Yeah.
you got to be careful. Yeah. So let's see. It's Noah VS Comics,
Yeah.
right, on Instagram.
Yep. That's right.
Yeah, that's the easiest way to kind of find you and follow what's happening. Yeah, so I guess we'll see each other in South Carolina.
Yeah, that's right. I hope so.
That'd be great. Yeah, I'm thank you, man. Like, I appreciate you coming on. I typically don't do like a real deep dive into one piece of work, but like it's a compelling piece of work, and I really wanted to talk about this with you.
Man, thank you. I appreciate
Yeah, maybe we'll do another one, you know, down the road, and we can just kind of talk more sort of the travels of creativity, and then on the next project. I don't know.
Cool.
Yeah. So anything else you want to, like, are you watching, reading anything else that's really exciting for you?
Not right now. I'm just too busy being a dad. I have a very young baby, so I don't.
That's right. I've
Anything.
seen pictures. I've seen pictures. The baby's at signings, so
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
the baby to work. You know, that's good. Yeah. Well, hey, listen, there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
All right. Well, are you cool? Was this fun? Good.
Yeah. Great, man. Thank
All
you.
right. Let's do the outro, and then we'll have the rest of our lives.
All right.
Oh, all right. No, I really thank you for coming on. It was a blast having you. Go find Noah at Noah VS Comics on Instagram. Get the book. It is really a great read. Change your mind, change your life, you know, do it through comics. And otherwise, man, till the next time. Peace out. See you.